Okay, there. Okay, all right. Welcome to week 3, y'all. Thanks for joining. I just realized it is almost the end of April. A third of the year is almost gone past. And if you factor in the holidays and also travel this summer, it's like more than a third. Pretty crazy to think about. Where has 2022 gone? So today's class, we're going to be talking about deal analysis and then talking a little bit about negotiations. Just to give you a little recap of the first 2 weeks, if you're just tuning in now. Week 1, we talked about why real estate, kind of at a high level, the benefits of investing in real estate. And then more importantly, thinking about what is your personal why? You know, why do you want to embark in this endeavor potentially in buying rental properties and maybe having to figure out a property manager and flying out to market, doing all these things? What is your why? And why you want to get started in all of this? Because I think that when stuff hits the fan, that'll be important because it will hit the fan at some point. It's just not going to be completely smooth sailing. And then week 2, last week, we talked about how to analyze a market, looking at some key metrics. And thanks for those of you who submitted your homework assignment or your brick. I still need to respond to quite a few of you. But more importantly, think about like there's no right answer, right, when you're picking a market. And then also we talked about building your team. Property manager is likely going to be your most important person that you're working with, but you're also going to need to find a local lender, a real estate agent, and then maybe a contractor, depending on what type of projects you're looking to do. And then before we get into today's topic, I wanted to share just some different research reports. I will email these out as part of the recap as well. But just so you know what's available out there for those of you who are like more inclined to really dig into the data. So these are some like really big institutions that have created some of these research reports. And I'll just kind of scroll through it. Hopefully you can see on my screen here, but this one's like from the Milken Institute. Thanks, Annie. And you'll just see, I mean, it's a really meaty analysis, usually broken down by different metros, different cities. They'll even have their previous ranks. You know, no need to go into all the detail, but you can just kind of see like how thorough this is. And I'll show you. So that one's from the Milken Institute. This is also from the Milken Institute from 2020. But there's just like a plethora of information out there. And again, here's like their rankings, right, from 1 to 25. And again, no right answer, right? I'm sure there's been people who've invested in Provo, Salt Lake City area and done really, really well, right? And some people who have done even better in Boise, even though it's ranked 7th highest. So going back to what we talked about last week, no right answers, but I think there are some wrong answers. Like, I don't think, I keep hounding on the Albuquerque. Like, I don't think, like, for example, I don't think Albuquerque's on this list. No offense to anyone who might be from Albuquerque again. And then State of the Nation's Housing. This is from Harvard. Maybe some of you guys have heard of that university, but just some really, really good stuff. And then this one's from PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, another big financial firm, accounting firm. So I'll email these out so that you can take a look. But I think for those of you who want to dig into more data, look even deeper into things, you know, this could be a really good place to kind of get some of those juices going and juices flowing.
Hey, Cliff, just a basic question. I think you answered this last time too, but is there, it sounds like if you wanted to piece together data, you can go to a lot of different places. Is there like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sources that you really like? Again, I just want to confirm that for like analyzing different markets, let's say, for example.
That's a good, I actually I don't really know of one source that consolidates all the info. I would say I kind of piece it together from a few different places. Yeah. Like, and a lot of it starts from just Googling, which I feel like a long time ago was like there's like a faux pas to say you're researching off of Google, but now I think it's considered a little bit more legit. But yeah, no one source that I'm aware of. But I think maybe like some of these research reports could be pretty thorough in terms of, and also a lot of the big commercial real estate companies do market by market analyses too. That could be
Got it.
Yeah, and it'd be kind of uniform between the markets if that's what you're looking for.
Cool, that's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, so this is a little preview of what we're going to be talking about today, which is analyzing a deal and kind of running the numbers. I kind of put this in bold at the top. Analyze every number yourself. And you might hear of this term called pro forma. And kind of in the real estate investing community, we joke it's like, oh, it's French for kind of bullshit, effectively. Pro forma is like the most ideal optimistic conditions have to work out for those numbers to hold true effectively. So they're not like made up, but close to it, because it's just kind of not realistic. And we'll kind of go through this in a little bit more detail with an example. But for rental comps, I usually use this website called rentometer.com. You can also look at Zillow for the property or nearby properties, and also look at what's renting in the area. Craigslist is a pretty good resource too. But Rentometer, I'll show you in a second, they aggregate all the rent data nearby based on number of bedrooms, and it's just a pretty good resource. Property taxes, that's going to be one of your main big expenses. And we're going to gather that from the county website and do a property search. And I'll show you how to do this. And it's kind of the same format for any property. Property search data is available. It's public information. And then one thing to note here, though, every city and county does this a little bit differently, but we're going to look up what's called the assessed value of the property. Here in Northern California, as soon as the property changes hands, and if it has increased in value, then the assessed value will just jump, almost immediately. Kind of that's like the city and state's way of like collecting more property taxes from folks. But in other markets, for example, like Madison or Chicago or other places, the assessment might happen on like a rolling basis. They might target different parts of the city and assess those areas, and then that area might see a jump. So it's not necessarily as soon as it changes hands that the assessed value goes up. So important to note that in your kind of underwriting and analysis for a property. Homeowners insurance, we won't email a local insurance agent, but that's what I would recommend doing. Email someone from Allstate and State Farm, get 2 different quotes, and then you can plug that into your model. And then typically you'll need to insure the home for at least the mortgage amount. So if you're taking out a loan for $100,000, at a minimum, the dwelling coverage is $100,000. You might want that to be more than that if possible. And then I typically recommend at least half a million, $1 million if you want, to beef up your coverage for liability coverage. That would cover like a slip and fall accident if it's in a snowy area, dog bites, those just like things that could happen on property that you might be responsible for as a landlord. Estimates for other expenses, we'll use these as a placeholder, and this is kind of more for initial analysis, but I think general underwriting, people use 5% vacancy, 10% repairs, 10% for repairs and CapEx, which is capital expenditures. And then utilities, you'll need to plug that into the underwriting, but ideally that's not paid for by the landlord. Ideally, that's a cost that you could pass off to your tenants. And then property management, 10% I think is a good placeholder, but that's on the higher end, I would say. For single family homes, 8 to 10% is pretty common. And if you get into multifamily, anywhere from, 4 to 6% of rents is more common. Usually the more units, the lower the monthly property management fee on a percentage basis is. And then most underwriting will project revenue and expenses growing at 2 to 3% per year. I think that's a good conservative number to use. Although I think with inflation and kind of what's happening in the world, folks might need to make some adjustments there, because I think 2 to 3% might not be as realistic, at least in the short term going forward. And the biggest unknowns are the large CapEx repairs. And so the things to just kind of call it there and think about are, one, don't ever assume like the seller's numbers are accurate of like what they provide to you, which they might, right? If you're considering a property, sometimes the seller might provide some numbers. Always double check those. And then the high CapEx items could be like roof, appliances, plumbing, hot water heater, HVAC, and electrical. I can't remember why I included this. I think someone had asked me about like where did the 5% vacancy come from? So this is just a slide to just show like this is from CBRE, Coldwell Banker, Richard Ellis. It's a big commercial real estate firm. Vacancy for residential has been in that 5% range. Like pre-COVID, it was hovering right above 4, and then post-COVID, it's projected to still be around that 4% mark. And this is also looking at urban versus suburban neighborhoods as well. So generally speaking, I think 5% vacancy is kind of a good placeholder to use until you get better data for that market. Okay, so we're gonna do an example together and a couple things to note. So we talked about this like 1% rule, and I think that's a general guiding post that I use. Like if you're gonna buy a property for $100,000, you want it to rent close to $1,000 a month. If it's less than that, which in today's market, I think is generally gonna happen, 800, 700. But if it's $200 or $300 a month and you're buying it for 100,000, I might not even need to run the numbers because I know it's just not gonna cash flow and just won't meet my criteria. I have two different underwriting models. The one that we're going to use today is this like single family, small multifamily one. It's kind of a quick and dirty model. Takes, when you get good at it, takes 5 minutes to fill out. And that's not the only analysis that I do, but it's a good starting point before I kind of, get more detailed and kind of refine the numbers. Just give me a starting point of like, okay, is this a deal that I want to consider? And I have another underwriting model that I'll share with you guys in the email later this week. And then some considerations, we talked about this like growth rate for income expenses, 2 to 3%. That's at least generally what everyone used, I would say, before in the last couple months where there's been all this talk about inflation and kind of it not being transitory anymore. And appreciation usually 2 to 3%. Hard to say what these numbers should be now if we're factoring in non-transitory inflation, but at least for today's purposes, I'm still going to use that 2 to 3%. And then before we get into the model, I'll just kind of show you really quickly, like kind of what it looks like. I think on this call, we have a wide range of backgrounds, right? If you've worked in finance, investment banking, private equity, consulting, a model like this might be, it's going to be very easy for you to digest. And then I think we have other people on this call who are maybe more new to number crunching, Excel spreadsheets. And so I'm kind of catering towards that second group. And just so you know, like this is what's called a discounted cash flow analysis. Fancy term, maybe if you've done some research on investing or kind of followed Warren Buffett over the years, he talks a lot about this. At a high level, what it's doing is we're projecting out the cash flows for the property because a property is effectively a business, right? It makes some money, you have expenses, and you have profit at the end of the day. Same thing like a business, just with 4 walls and a roof. And we're projecting out what those revenue and expenses would be for the next 30 years. You'll see here, it goes all the way up to 30. And then you discount it back to today because $1 in year 30 is not the same as $1 today. $1 today is worth more effectively. And so that's what this model is doing. It just looks like a ton of cells and looks kind of scary, but at a high level, hopefully that concept kind of makes sense. And I've tried to simplify it where these blue cells are the only ones that we need to punch in. And I'll show you where I grab all of those numbers from. And again, this is just like a very, I would say, cursory initial first stab at running the numbers, right? And then I'll get more detailed if I'm considering the property after this.
Hey, Cliff.
Then, yeah.
Quick question. Hey, when it comes to like, I guess your years, how many years do you go out to? I guess like just because it cuts off at 19, I'm wondering if you go up to 20 and then do the terminal value, or do you like just?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, this thing goes up to 30. Sorry,
This goes up to 30. Okay, cool. So there's
Yeah.
like no real like terminal value like calculation here then.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, this one just has it like go out to 30.
Let's just go up to 30. Okay, cool. No, that helps. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think as I'm thinking about, because I didn't build this model, just to be clear, this is like, I found this online, but it worked really well for my purposes. I think that makes sense because a mortgage is 30 years as well. So
Cool.
kind of,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing before we dig into the numbers is I do want to just say, like, once you get used to this, it's pretty simple. And these might be kind of strong words, but if you are really considering getting into real estate investing, you need to run the numbers, right? You're doing a disservice to yourself if you're investing your parents or other people's money and you're not taking the time to run the numbers. You're really putting yourself at a lot of risk, right? Not necessarily the model will predict everything that's going to happen in the future, but at least is a really good guiding post as to whether or not this deal makes sense or not. And I think I've just come across a lot of investors who don't even look at run the numbers at all and kind of buy property based on feeling and where they think the market's headed. And that can just put you in a tough spot, especially, knowing where we are. We talked about real estate cycles last week as well, right? I can tell you, I don't know, when the music's going to end, but I can tell you we're closer to the top than we are at the bottom, right? I think most people would agree with that. There might be 6 months left, 3 years left of runway. Good still money-making opportunity, but we're closer to the top than the bottom. So running the numbers is even more important. Okay, so I'm gonna walk you through how I punch this in. Again, the blue boxes are the ones that we're gonna focus on. And I didn't have time to look up a new property. So I'm just gonna use the one that I looked up. This was the property that a month ago was on market at the beginning of March when I ran this class last. Funny enough, it was listed at 289 at the time, and it actually just closed at 335. And we'll punch in 289 as a starting point, because actually when we did the class a month ago, I said, hey, this one's actually a pretty good deal. I would actually consider like putting an offer on it. And lo and behold, it clearly was a good deal at 289 because someone decided to submit above that. So let's start to fill in some of these numbers. So I'm going to put in 289 here, and then we can rerun it again at 335 to see what type of, how good of a deal the buyer actually got. So purchase price 289, improvements. Well, actually, let me allow you to kind of look at these photos first. Sorry, because I've seen this property before. This is in Madison, Wisconsin, a submarket that I like quite a bit. Low vacancy, student population, just generally good place to live. I'll just kind of scan through the photos a little bit, just so you can see. This one's a duplex, so it's a 2-bed, 1-bath on each side. So you have 2 different kind of tenants, 2 different rental streams coming in. Okay, so I can kind of get a general feel for the property. Garage, detached garage, and I'll also let you read the remarks here. Let me zoom in a little bit, because you can tell that the way that they presented this was clearly geared toward an investor likely going to buy the property. It's not like the fuzzy, oh, it's 2 blocks away from BART and you're going to have sunshine in your face and all that stuff. How you might list a residential property, right? This someone to move in for their family. This is clearly, they're talking about leases. They're talking about who pays for the utilities, lawn care, snow and trash removal. And then these are the CapEx items that we just talked about, of like the things that you'd want to check on when you have a home inspection to make sure that there's a new hot water heater, sump pump, which is what kind of pulls water out from like the garage or basement level. Furnaces, 2010, that indicates that it's relatively new because a furnace can last 20, 30 years. 10 windows were replaced, roof, siding. So my main takeaway from this is it's good that the tenants don't pay for the utilities. I would want to confirm and check that to make sure that that's not just a short-term thing that they've done to like increase the NOI for the property effectively. And that is a market norm for the tenants to do that. And then also hot water heater and all these CapEx items look like they've been really relatively taken care of. Okay, so back to this. So purchase price 289, closing costs. I just use a placeholder of 5%. Again, this is like the initial massage, and we're gonna massage again to, if the numbers look good and get into more detail. Down payment, 25%. That's, I think, pretty common for lenders to expect nowadays for an investment property. Interest rate, 4.5%. We could bump it up to 5. I think that's probably a little bit more realistic, and maybe it's a little bit higher than 5 now for a rental property. Mortgage, this is like how many years it's like spread out over. 30 years is pretty common. For a commercial loan, it might be 20, 25, but for residential 1 to 4 units, a 30-year amort is pretty common. Monthly rent, so this is where we're going to go to this website called Rentometer. And I pay for kind of the pro version. I think it's like $50 a year, but it's been really worthwhile for me. Let me grab this address off Union Street, Madison. So actually, this is like more for actually landlords to see if their rents are consistent with the market. But of course, as an investor, you can use it too. So I'm just going to punch in a random number, right? Just because I want this report to generate what the market is seeing. So my 1500 doesn't really matter there. And I'll hit analyze. Again, this is just cursory, quick review of things, but it's pulling rents of neighboring 2-bedroom units. It's actually good to see there's quite a bit in the neighborhood, right? And we don't really have time to dig into it here, but like you can look at the pro report. It gives you some pretty cool analysis here. It gives you like how rents have trended in the market, what the 1, 2, 3 bedroom spreads are because maybe there's opportunity. Like in this case, like it almost looks like 1-bedrooms could be a better opportunity because they're renting for as high as the 2. If there's a discount on price, could be. And then also provides a lot of addresses here too. So you can dig into this further and like see like, okay, is this home that we just saw in these photos, does this home compare? Like, is it on par with other rental units, or is it crappier, or is it a lot nicer? And you can then maybe adjust from there. But currently this is saying, hey, we can say the average rent is 1,300. We'll just call it 1,300 a month in the market. So there's 2 units. So we're gonna do 1,300 plus 1,300. 5% vacancy, as we talked about. Property taxes, we're gonna get that from the city or the county assessor page. I have it pulled up here, but let me just show you what that looked like. It started with Google. Madison property tax search. Okay, first link that comes up is the official City of Madison website. You punch in the property address. Nope. Submit. And this is all public information, right? This is like, if you own any real estate, your information is out there publicly. We know who the owners are, and we don't have time to kind of dig into this, but there could be some more nuance and learnings from this too. Like, for example, the owner here lives on the property, right? But if the owner was out of state or somewhere else, likely they're an investor, and maybe your offer strategy could be a little bit different based on that. But here is kind of the main thing that we're trying to pull, which is in 2021, the assessed value of the home was 204. So these two things add up to 204. And the taxes on it was 4,312 cents. So we'll use that again, just as an initial placeholder. We would want to do more research to see what Madison does. Does the assessed value change once the property is sold, etc.? But as an initial placeholder, that's a good number to use. Okay. And then homeowners insurance, Redfin had put $99 per month. So we'll just use that for now. But of course, that's something that's pretty easy to get. Email to insurance agents and say, hey, you want a quote for this property. And then we fill in these other blue boxes. So maintenance and repairs, we put 10%, as we chatted about earlier. Repairs, CapEx, we usually do 10%. Utilities in this case, we know are not paid by the landlord, so it's 0. Variable cost, that's going to be for re-renting the units. So let's just keep that at 10% for now. And then fixed cost PM. Oh, sorry. Actually, the variable cost is actually we actually don't need a variable cost. This fixed cost PM is actually what I meant by re-renting the units, the leasing fee effectively. So I'm going to put $1,300 there. That's effectively assuming 1 tenant turnover every 2 years, which I think is depending on the market, but I think that's a fair assumption for Madison. And then snow and grass 0 and trash 0 per the listing description. And then this then outputs a few things for us. The 5-year IRR, which is like an annualized return, and then all the way to 30 years. And then this is like assuming 2% appreciation. One thing to just note here is like, you can see how wildly what kind of change like appreciation impacts IRR. So if we bump it up to 3%, if we go to 7% appreciation, 10% appreciation, you see that the IRR just kind of jumps like crazy, right? So that's why in any of your underwriting, you really want to sanity check that and maybe be a little bit more conservative. Because someone might kind of propose a deal to you and say, hey, I'm expecting 30% IRR. And maybe that's because they're expecting something unrealistic on the appreciation side or being too optimistic. So that's kind of it. I know that might seem like very simple, but I would say as an initial pass, that's what I would do to analyze a property. This I would say is a relatively good deal at 13%, right? This person ultimately paid $335. So let's see kind of what those numbers look like. And it jumps it down to 10, 11% IRR. Still decent enough, I think, for someone to consider as their first deal. And maybe they're a little bit more optimistic about the appreciation and the rent growth. And then they feel like it's a pretty good deal.
Hey, Cliff, a basic question. For IRR, is that the same as cash on cash return, or is that something different? And
Good question. They're different. So IRR factors in appreciation, like paying off your loan. It's effectively your total return
Okay.
on an annualized basis, versus cash on cash would really only think about right here. So right here, to buy this property, your cash outlay is 100,000, right? So it's factoring in, that's your denominator when you're calculating cash on cash. And your cash on cash would be, what is the cash that's being spit out by the property? So here, actually, it's this calculation here, 3.5%.
Oh, I see, I see, I see.
Because just the cash flow divided by your cash outlay
Hmm,
versus
okay.
ROI is taking into account appreciation, debt pay down. So your ROI should be higher than your cash on cash, assuming you levered the property.
Oh, I see. Okay. That makes sense. And then for maybe I got this like for bigger pockets or something, but like what were like is a good baseline that we should be measuring either for cash on cash or IRR? So like I've heard 12% or 8% or things like that. But do you have a baseline for something that
Yeah.
looks quote unquote good and something that also looks like okay?
I think a deal I would consider is like 5% cash on cash, 15% IRR. That's something that I would really be digging into to understand, like, do I want to pull the trigger? Even something like this at 10%, I mean, that's on the lower side. But if it's a first deal that kind of gets you into the game and understanding things, I think it could be some, like I would even consider something like this, just to be clear. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. So that's analyzing a single family home or duplex or small property. Next, let's kind of quickly, I wanted to show you an offering memorandum for like a commercial property. So this is a building that's just right around the corner. I think I can almost see it from my window. That's like literally how, that's actually how I got this offering memorandum. There's a sign right here that said, please call Teddy Swain if you want more info. And I called him and he emailed this to me. So I'll show you kind of what I look at when I'm going through one of these offering memorandums. And it's just a fancy, it's like a presentation deck from the broker. That's effectively what it is. And this is a 6-unit property, 6 units up here with a commercial space down here. This commercial space used to be like a bicycle rental repair shop down here. So this is kind of like the summary page, right? It kind of gives you a sense of like the property mix, how big the space is, their pro forma, right? We know that that's probably bullshit, and I'll show you why in subsequent slides. Pro forma NOI, if everything goes perfectly to plan, what your cap rate and NOI will be. And I also think it's kind of funny. We live in a kind of, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff happening in this part of Oakland, in Uptown, but it's just funny, like this crane is like in the back of every photo that they've incorporated in this deck. I mean, there are some cranes, but you got to really only be shooting your photos in that one angle to see the crane every time. So kind of that gave me a chuckle. And then you'll also notice that since this deck is geared towards investors, that they're also looking at a lot of the stats that we talked about in our last class: population growth, population, house, like median income. You know, those types of proxies for like how well this market could perform. Maybe I can even jump to some of these further later slides just so you can see, but like they include, you know, like distance to other neighborhoods, new units that are coming up, all the good stuff that's happening here. This is like a Hyatt hotel that's getting, that's just opened its doors right around the corner. Stuff like that, just really trying to sell the neighborhood. And then this slide here is kind of I would say the most important slide, right? This is the current rents for the building. And in fact, 5 of the 6 units are occupied, but they're really low rents compared to the market. One of them is vacant, and then the commercial unit is vacant as well. So they're using these market rents. This is the pro forma, effectively, to just give you a sense of how different the pro forma is compared to reality. If everything goes right and you're somehow able to, you know, vacate these tenants, you would be able to rent these amounts. And then very optimistically, I mean, that's a little bit shocking to me to think you can rent it for $6,800 a month. But I you know, I don't follow commercial, you know, leases all too closely. One consideration too, for any of you are thinking about getting into commercial real estate, a space like this, I mean, ideally you can rent it out as is, but there also are potential costs for the owner, the seller, or I mean, the owner of the property. Because if a restaurant moved in, for example, they might need you to help them build out the place. So that could be a couple $100,000 endeavor, usually in the form of what's called TIs, tenant improvements. It's effectively almost a loan that the landlord provides to the tenant, and then you increase their rent to collect that money back over the 5, 10, 20-year lease that you have with them. Let me see my notes real quick to see if there's anything that I'm forgetting. No, okay, that's it. But yeah, like lo and behold, right, this property is still on market, right? They were asking for 2.75, and that's based on everything being optimistic, pro forma being perfect, and it's still sitting, right? Clearly, the market value is not 275 for this property. I would say the truth usually is somewhere in between, right? It's very unlikely you can get all of this, but the rents are definitely on the lower side, and you can lease these up and get more rent. So probably the true value of it is somewhere kind of in between.
Cliff, I saw on one of the pages it says all units subject to rent control. So like, what is your thought on stuff on rent control in, like, California?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Stuff. I would say most of the investors, most of the savvier investors that I know, stay away from California generally, because the rent control can really hamper your returns and just make things tough. And you don't know where things may progress, because right now California is very, very tenant friendly, almost like anti-landlord in many ways. And it's just risk that you're taking on unnecessarily. And currently, at least in Oakland, San Francisco, areas that like I cover, our real estate team covers, rent increases are subject to like CPI effectively. You can only bump up rents by inflation. So historically that was, 2-3%. So that's why you get these kind of funny numbers here with these rents, like $791. Maybe this person started off at like $400 a month 20 years ago or whatever. And then they've been bumped up 3% per year. Now they're at $791.89.
Yeah, I see. And then is it that, am I understanding correctly? Like, well, I mean, if you don't do, if the unit is not subject to rent control, and pretty much like, if you buy a property that has a lease already, there's essentially nothing you can do about, the lease being, I guess, like kept,
Right.
like even though the ownership might have changed. So it's like, if unit 1 just signed their lease for 12 months and I bought it at month 6, then the next 6 months, like I just gotta stick with that until it's lifted, like that lease is lifted, then I can just essentially like either kick them out or like come up with another lease or up the rent so much that essentially force them out.
Well, it's actually even more onerous than that on the landlord side.
Okay.
So, and I should say, like, hey, I'm not a real estate attorney. You should chat with a real estate attorney. You're really getting into the nuances of it. But the way it works, from my understanding, is you can't actually boot a tenant, at least here in Oakland, if they're paying rent on time. So even if their lease is up and it becomes month to month, and they're paying on time, you can't just give them 30-day notice and then you can bump it up to market rent. That's not how it works. You can only bump them up by CPI, and if they're paying on time, then they kind of have first right of refusal, like they can stay there.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah, you can see kind of why it's like it just becomes really tough as a landlord. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sourcing deals, right? Because I think that's on the forefront of a lot of people's mind of like, okay, if I want to get into real estate investing, how do I start to get some deal flow? I'd say first, MLS is a really good place to start. I think there's a misconception that it's a terrible place to find deals, but I've bought a lot of deals off MLS, and it's just a good place to get a feel for the market, especially if you're getting started, right? And just to reiterate, no wrong market, and just go for a single, not a double, right? You don't go, it's hard to get a home run on your first deal. You might not even know what a home run looks like, to be honest. And that's I would say a good starting place. Next, you might want to consider like working with an agent, but this can take a little bit more work than you might realize, which is like an agent can send you MLS deals and some off-market deals, but it's going to require building a relationship. As you can imagine, like you call an agent up in Philly or Nashville, what incentivizes that person to start sending you kind of the best stuff that they have? I recall a chat. I called a broker in Charlotte. This was a couple of years ago, and I could just tell he didn't really want to talk to me for very long. And he said, not in a rude way, just as a very matter of fact, he was like, hey, just so you know, you're the fourth person from California that called me this month and said they have money to invest in Charlotte. He was kind of like, take a number, right? Like, you're going to need to show me why I want to work with you a little bit versus the other way around. And I think that's something to just realize if you're going to break into real estate, especially with how hot the market is right now, that you're going to need to kind of put in some legwork to get started as the investor. And then just, larger deals, I would say 20 unit plus, and a lot of commercial properties are usually sold through a broker because there is risk on the seller side to put it on market. You might have tenants stop paying rent. You might have a harder time leasing to new tenants because they know that the building's for sale, and there's just risk there, right? Of like, is this new owner going to be good? What are they going to do? Are they going to bump up our rents? Those types of things. And why not just rent from the building next door that's not for sale? And then we won't really have time to get into this, but I just want to plant the seed with some of you that deal sourcing can get really sophisticated. These are like, when I go to some of these real estate conferences, it's just remarkable to see these systems that people have built, right? Like, these are kind of the three basic steps that people do. It's like, first, you pull a list of distressed sellers, people in probate. In other words, someone's passed away, unfortunately, someone going through divorce. There's no loan balance on the home anymore, or someone who's owned the home for 30 plus years. Likely they're close to retirement age or wanting to sell the property. You pull that list, and then you effectively just call all of them, right? And a lot of these investors are actually using virtual assistants it's just a numbers game. They're calling dozens and dozens of people. 95% of them tell them to take a hike, don't ever call me. And then you get 2% that picks up your call. Half of those people are willing to consider an offer, and then half of those are willing to sign. And before you know it, you've reached out to 1,000 people and you have 2 deals closed. It's just a big numbers game, but it definitely works if you're willing to put in the legwork and build those systems. Loan terms, I realize that this is a little redundant because we covered some of it yesterday. I think last week, Haley, I think, had asked some questions about loan terms. So maybe this is one that folks can just kind of reference down the line. But I kind of think of financing in terms of 2 buckets. So for conventional financing, if you're buying your primary home or a building that's 1 to 4 units like for rentals, you can get pretty good loan terms. You can get a 30-year fixed. You can even consider an adjustable rate mortgage. You could buy points to bring down the interest rate. And if you're putting less than 20% down, there might be something called PMI, mortgage insurance. But then for larger properties, anything that's 5 units or above, or like a warehouse commercial building, that is a commercial loan. There's no like Fannie Freddie equivalent of that. So that needs to be a commercial loan. And so some considerations there are, like, is the loan assumable? In other words, like, when you sell the property, the new owner could actually just take over that loan, which could be something important to consider because interest rates are still relatively low right now and could help you exit the property a lot more easier. Prepayment penalty, some banks will charge this. It's effectively, they're saying, hey, we put in all this work to give you this loan. If you're going to close the loan and sell the property, and usually it's like a sliding scale. So if it's within the first year, it's a 5% prepayment penalty, second year, 4%, and it starts to dial down. And then you don't have that after 5 years. And then balloon payment, we talked about this last week as well. Like, most commercial loans will have some sort of, hey, it's calculated over the next 20, 25 years, but there's a 5 or 7 or 10-year balloon payment where you're going to need to refinance or sell the property and pay off the remaining balloon at that time. It's effectively the bank's way to lower their interest rate risk because they need that requires folks to refinance every 5, 7, 10 years. So to adjust the interest rate that they're collecting on the money that they're borrowing. And then I would say this is maybe food for thought for later down the road, but as your portfolio grows, you might want to consider staggering your commercial loans. And when do those balloons kind of come due, right? So for a lot of investors in the last couple of years, rates were great. Everyone refinanced to a 5-year balloon, but that could be risky in the sense that now in 2026, what will interest rates hold? So you might want to just stagger some of those to mitigate risk a little bit. And then submitting your offer. So say you find a good property, you want to submit an offer. I think some things I just wanted to share is, like, in today's market, since it's quite competitive, I don't really have like too many tips on the offer submission side. It really is, I think, decisiveness, working with your agent and getting guidance from them and looking at comps and just getting a sense of competition as well. But then also being quick. Speed is something that really helps people in this type of market. Like if you're able to be one of the first offers in, you likely have a better chance at getting the home at a better price than if you're the sixth offer in. That's almost, I would say, generally true with any market that I've seen. Sometimes they'll hold off for an offer date like we do in the Bay Area. But even then, there's some cases where just being the first offer in, the seller might get antsy and might want to take your offer. And then just a note that when you get down to it, just when your offer gets accepted, just to calendar all of your contingency dates. A good agent should be reminding you of upcoming contingencies like inspection, finance, appraisal, but know that ultimately you're the person who signed right on the contract, and you need to make sure you're keeping track of those as well.
Cliff, do you give people exploding offers?
Oh, yeah, like with the limited time to respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say every offer that you submit, like here, for example, here in California, this contract, if you don't fill in anything, gives the seller 3 days to respond. Our team's never submitted an offer where we didn't fill that in with a tighter deadline. So we'll usually, it's a delicate balance, right? You don't want to pressure them and put them in a corner where they feel like you're trying to bully them, but you also don't want to give them enough time to shop around and really, consider every single option against yours. So I would say if you're submitting in the morning, that evening could be a reasonable time to have them make a decision. Or if you're submitting at night, maybe the next day by afternoon. But yeah, generally, yes, you want to put some sort of time pressure on them.
Got it. Thank you.
And then just some food for thought, like, is it possible to have a win-win negotiation? I think for me, the way I was I don't want to say the way I was raised, but I think the way that the way my dad kind of projected things was like, if I'm losing, if the other party's winning in the negotiation, then I'm losing effectively. And I think real estate has kind of opened my eyes to think about more of like win-win negotiations for all parties. I've typically found that negotiations can't really unfold in a good way if people have too much ego on the table, right? And like they have to win, then it's like really hard to make progress. And then on that note of like just seeing different scenarios play out, like the couple deals that I've gotten over the years that were really enlightening to me were like one, like a property that I purchased in Philly, we got a really good deal on it. And the backstory to that was the owner had inherited the property from their mom, 2 years prior. And in those subsequent 2 years, so the home was in Philly, she lived in DC. And in those 2 years, it was a nightmare for her to manage the property out of state without a property manager. And by the time I got wind of the property, tenant wasn't paying. And it sounded like there was even maybe a squatter in the property at some point. So like the seller just wanted out. And so she was able to give me, this is like concede on price, you define the terms. She gave me a good price and I gave her her terms, which was like all cash offer, close in 10 days. So it's kind of a win-win for both parties. There's another deal that we'd end up closing on it, but it was a couple was going through a divorce, and effectively the judge had said, hey, you need to liquidate the property ASAP so that we can split the proceeds, right? So those are things that like, personally in my sphere, in my world, I haven't really experienced directly, but just because I haven't experienced it, like it does happen out there, right? And it's not like every single deal that you find those kind of situations will unfold, but just know that like it's possible to get good deals out there. And then another thing to consider for negotiations is this concept of seller financing. So it's effectively like if the seller is potentially looking to retire, or if they own the property free and clear and they don't have a loan anymore, they effectively become the bank. So instead of you taking out an 80% loan with a bank, you take an 80% loan with them through the property. So it kind of can be a win-win situation because sellers who own the property free and clear and are at retirement age, it could be a nice way for them to just get steady income. for the next 5, 10. I mean, you can kind of dictate kind of the terms. Maybe if they're closer to thinking that they might, pass away, then maybe it's a 5-year seller financing period with a balloon so that they can kind of collect that final amount and pass it off to their heirs, for example. And then in terms of request for repair from seller or taking off the purchase price, just say you're in contract and the property has $5,000 worth of work. A question that I get asked a lot is, should I have the seller make those repairs or should I take it off the purchase price? And generally, I'd recommend the latter, taking off the purchase price, just because if you have the seller complete the repairs, as you can imagine, incentives might not be aligned at that point. They might not be hiring the best contractor to complete the work. They're just trying to get it done as quickly as possible. And then a couple last notes is like thinking about relationships. And I think this kind of leads back to negotiations, which is like, will your property manager or your agent want to work with you, send you their best deals, etc., if you're a pain? That's kind of the simplest way to think of it. If you're trying to win every single point on every little thing and you're not willing to just go with the flow a little bit, are they going to be kind of the best? Like, how can you expect them to be the best partner in this real estate journey if you're not also reciprocating and kind of being the best partner? Like, this question has come up a bunch with some of the students in the last class of just like, oh, hey, this property manager is charging me 9%, but this other person across town is 8%. Who should I go with? And to me, that's not, I wouldn't even ask the question about 8 or 9%. I would just be thinking, who do you think can do a better job? That 1% at the end of the day shouldn't really impact your decision to buy the property or who to move forward with. Okay, and then for those of you inclined to do a little homework assignment, so here's your kind of next brick. Spend 5-10 minutes this week just analyzing one property. So if you've picked a market and you got a sense, okay, I want to invest in Nashville or whatever city, now find one property that you think could be a good investment property and take it through the steps that we went through and put it into the model. Make a copy of the model that I send you and punch in some of those numbers and see what are those returns. It might take a little while the first time, might take 20, 30 minutes the first time, but you'll start to build that muscle memory. You'll know where to go. And I promise you, it'll be a lot quicker. I think I could run the numbers, the initial numbers on a property, in less than 5 minutes now.
Hey, Cliff, I had a quick question. Going back to the model, the fixed cost PM, can you please explain that line item again?
Oh, yes. Sorry, this is confusing. Okay, so let me, yeah, sorry. I think maybe, okay. You're talking about this?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah, sorry. This should be like, maybe a better way to think about it is like lease renewal. So like there's two different components when you hire a property manager. Actually, I've realized okay, so there's these two, okay? So the variable cost is like your monthly, when you collect rents, they'll take 8 to 10% just for property management. They field the phone calls, toilet's leaky, they'll pick up that phone call, they'll take care of all that stuff. And then the separate fee for property manager is lease renewal. When they actually market the property, a vacant property, when it goes vacant, then they'll typically charge anywhere from 70 to 100% of that first month's rent to lease it up again. So it's kind of like two separate line items there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I realize, yeah, fixed cost, that's kind of a confusing term. Just think of it as like a lease renewal fee. Okay, cool. All right, yeah, let's do a little bit of Q&A. Sorry, I think we ran a little bit longer today. And then, oh, the thing that's kind of, I want to mention to everyone is, for some crazy reason, I think we got a bootleg version of this book. So if you are part of the group that emailed me that wanted a copy of these books that I shipped to everyone through Amazon, the blue book, this one, I think this one came to everyone and it's fine. This one's the better book in my opinion. They're both really good, but this one's just gold. This one on the screen here, Rental Property Investing by Brandon Turner, for whatever reason, I think we got some weird, it's like weird font. Looks like it got Google Translated. So I don't know if it's like an Amazon glitch or someone, what happened, but let me know if you got a bad version. And I'm still working through it with Amazon to see if we can get a refund, and I'll ship out new versions to folks. And if you have any ideas as to how that could even happen, please let me know. I'm just so curious, like what, yeah, very confusing. Okay. Any questions?
Hey, Cliff, what would you say from your opinion, what do you think like the hot markets are right now, just for like an entry level, real estate investor?
Good question. I would say, I think markets in Texas could be a good one, but like you're gonna need to like, it's not gonna be like Austin downtown, for example. It could be kind of tertiary markets, like right outside of Austin, like Round Rock. That's been a pretty hot market, but maybe like expanding a little bit outside of that as well. So I would say thinking about kind of like markets that have been on folks' radars, but kind of expanding past that just immediate geography a little bit. I'm pretty bullish on like the Southeast as well. Like I think Atlanta, Charlotte, those areas could be really good to start to dig into, because Atlanta metro is quite big. So I'd look into that, Charlotte, and then the Texas markets, I think could be a good kind of starting spot to consider.
Okay, cool.
Oh, I didn't realize Round Rock has the best donuts in the US. Thanks for sharing that, Annie. Oh, Round Rock. Let's see. Vanessa asked, oh, how did I take care of the difficult renter and squatter? So that one was, I can't really recall the exact situation, but it was delivered vacant to me, actually. So if I recall correctly, I think in the contract I had put property to be delivered vacant. And I don't know exactly how the seller worked through that. Maybe they had used some their agent, the selling agent, to help get that person out. But it was delivered vacant to me. I mean, there's repairs that were needed, but it was delivered vacant. And then Jezebel asked, is it better to have a local lender versus national lender? I would say almost in every case, it's better to use a local lender. Like very few, I would say almost none of the savvy real estate investors that I know are taking out a loan with like Bank of America to buy a rental property. There's a lot of benefit to using a local bank. Once you build a relationship with them, you might be able to close more quickly. It's all about, kind of those relationships in the market. They also might have some access to like deals that fell out of contract, for example. They could become a lead source for you as well.
Hey, Cliff. Question. You talked about assumable mortgages.
Okay.
I first heard about these because my mom always raves how in like the 80s when interest rates were 18%, her first place, she got an assumable mortgage for like a lot lower than that. So when I bought my current place at like a pretty low interest rate, I asked the loan agent if like the mortgage was assumable, and he said that it's pretty uncommon to get an assumable mortgage. Is that the case for like residential versus like multi-property commercial stuff? Like in terms of like your portfolio, how many of those are assumable?
Not that many. Yeah, residential loans, I don't think assumable is a thing with them. And then for commercial loans, that's really when it can only come into play. Yeah.
Okay, so anything that's like bigger than a 4-unit place is considered conventional,
Yeah.
or is not conventional, commercial, and then could potentially assumable. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's something that you might want to work in with the lender. I think that's another thing that is eye-opening too, and also a benefit of working with a local lender. I mean, they want to stick to their guidelines and what they normally do, but if you have enough sway and maybe you've done enough business with them, you'd be surprised. Like they're willing to be flexible on their loan terms to keep your business. So if you're saying I'm going to work with another bank unless you allow this to be assumable, you'd be surprised that that's something that they might allow you to write in to the loan term.
Yeah. And is that like a negotiation where it's like, if they were to make it assumable, they might come back at you and be like, okay, it'll be another X basis points in order for it to be assumable, like to protect them in a way. Like, is that your experience? I don't know. I'm just thinking of
Yeah,
how it looks.
it could be. Yeah, it
Okay.
could be a little bit of a negotiation. Yeah,
Cool.
but yeah, just something to consider. I like if a deal is good enough and you couldn't get assumable loan terms, I wouldn't nuke the deal and not proceed. It's just kind of more of a nice to have than imperative.
Cool.
But again, just one of those things, like I think maybe one of my takeaways too about real estate investing is just like so much of this is just like access to the knowledge is like how you build more wealth. It's like no one's really teaching these things. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to host this class. Is just like there's no like at least no class that I know of where you can just like learn all these things like directly, at least not taught in school typically. And if it's just a matter of like asking for something to be assumable or canceling the prepayment penalty, and it's all about just knowing and asking, that's yeah, could be important.
Can I ask a mortgage related question?
Yeah.
I have a friend who's obsessed with interest only mortgages.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that as part of all of this?
I think they could be a really wise move. Yeah. So just for context, like an interest only loan, just say you take out $1 million loan. If it's 3 or 4% interest only, the calculation's pretty easy. It's just 1 million times 4% divided by 12. That's like your monthly payment. It's drastically lower than if you incorporated having to pay for the principal in it as well. So from just like a cash flow management perspective and just like time value of money, I think the interest only loans can, but just like the risk is that you're not paying off any principal. So if you're aware of that from the get-go, I think it could be a smart move. Yeah, because you then also allow the compounding of like if you like a lot of these interest only loans are like first 10 years interest only, first 5 years interest only. And you can, I think it's a relatively safe assumption that in 10 years your rents are going to be a bit higher than what they are today. And then at that point, you can start to think about paying off the principal. Yeah.
I have a quick question. My agent's saying right now that in this hot market, contingencies are generally just not required in order to win. Is that kind of risky, or is that standard practice here in the Bay Area where the buyer will just not require any contingencies?
Yeah, okay, let's chat about that, because I think so contingencies are there to protect the buyer, right? To be clear, but at least I can speak for the Bay Area market because I work as a real estate engineer. A lot of the work and the due diligence is just front loaded. So when we submit a non-contingent offer in the Bay Area, it's not necessarily riskier by any means because we're reviewing an inspection report ahead of time. We're having the bank underwrite your financing ahead of time. So it's relatively safe to remove your finance contingency. Because that's the point of the finance contingency, is during that 5-10 day period, the bank would review your documents. Now we're asking them to do it before you submit your offer. Appraisal contingency, similar. It's like, I guess that one maybe there's some perceived risk there, but we're also looking at comps and sold homes, likely homes that an appraiser is going to look at as well to value the home. So I think that's just a little bit of a misconception. If you're not going to do any inspections and you haven't gotten a pre-approval, and your agent's asking to waive all your contingencies, then that seems like a lot of risk. But just to be clear, like even in other markets where you submit an offer with contingencies, by the time you close escrow, you will have removed all your contingencies.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know if you want to chat about that more, Chuck. But I would say it's not necessarily more risky to remove your contingencies. All right. Any other? Oh, let me check the chat real quick. Nope. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for joining. And next week is our last class. It is on what it takes to win and succeed in real estate investing. And just as that's, I would say it's probably my favorite class in the sense that we're going to talk, of course, it's going to be real estate related, but it's going to talk about some like woo-woo stuff, which I think might, I don't know, maybe people don't think it's related to real estate investing, but I found that it's actually the most important part. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about Tony Robbins and the impact that he's had on you know, my life, my wife's life too. And just like some of these real estate conferences that I've gone to, and being around people who have succeeded and built massive real estate portfolios, what I've kind of gleaned from their journeys and what it takes to win and do well. Okay. All right. Have a good night. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thanks, Cliff.
Thanks, Cliff.
Okay. Take care. See you guys.
Thanks, Cliff.